Good understanding gains favour, but the way of the unfaithful is hard. Every prudent man acts with knowledge, but a fool lays open his folly. My name's Arthur, and I thank you for joining me as we share together from Proverbs chapter 13, these two verses 15 and 16. Good understanding gains favour, but the way of the unfaithful is hard. Every prudent man acts with knowledge, but a fool lays open his folly. I once saw a cartoon in a university alumni magazine which suggested that faith in God was blind. It was in the context of a discussion about creation and evolution, and the implication was that those who believed in creation were blind. But in fact, it is the evolutionist who has blind faith, because there's not a shred of evidence for evolution. All the evidence points to creation and subsequent decline. The fact that water runs downhill doesn't prove that it runs uphill. It is completely illogical to think that an infinite number of mistakes and errors and random events could produce a finely tuned, sophisticated system that we observe. When we see a pattern in something, we know that there must have been a creator of that pattern. And when we see the wonder of creation, so many things on so many different scales working together in a most harmonious and marvellous system, there must be a creator. But how can we know him? We know him because he's revealed himself in the scriptures. And the scriptures provide an eminently feasible and reasonable alternative to evolution, that God created the heavens and earth in 6 days. And the archaeological and historical evidence supports that proposition. The evolutionist and the creationist have the same physical evidence in front of them. The difference is the interpretation of that evidence. One on the proposition that there is no God and it must have happened naturally, whatever that means. And the other accepts the testimony of God himself, that he created the world, that sin came into the world, that the world was destroyed by a flood and repopulated after that flood. The flood provides an explanation for the bulk of the fossils, the ice age, and the geographic features as we see them on the earth today. So I wrote back to the magazine, presenting an alternative view, based on my experience as an animal breeder and as a research scientist. It is not those who are trusting God who are blind, but, as Peter explains, those who are willfully ignorant and refuse to see the evidence. For in Christ are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. And the Bible teaches us the importance of gaining knowledge and gaining wisdom and gaining understanding, which is what this proverb's all about. Good understanding gains favour, but the way of the unfaithful is hard. Every prudent man acts with knowledge, but a fool lays open his folly. The Bible provides us with knowledge that we could not otherwise gain, and it provides us with understanding far beyond our own experience, because we see the experience of many others, some who have done well and some who have not done well. And my mind turns to the story of Joseph. Joseph, as a young man, spent a lot of time with his father Jacob. When Joseph's older brothers were young, Jacob was busy working for his father-in-law. But they were now growing up, and they were taking responsibility, caring for the sheep. Joseph had time to spend with his father, and he learned the history of his people. He learned about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and this knowledge led him to understand that God was over the affairs of men. We often hear the statement that a good education is the key to a good future. An education means you gain knowledge. The bulk of it you gain by learning from the experience of others. When you have knowledge and can apply it, you become successful in your work and in your endeavours. So when Joseph found himself as a slave, he acted with prudence and became steward for Potiphar's household. When he found himself in prison, he acted with prudence and found himself managing the affairs of the prison, and ultimately managing the affairs of the whole state. Daniel and his friends were young men who were very bright. They applied themselves diligently to study, learning the Babylonian language and the ways, but also knowing the ways of God and keeping a priority to them, not substituting one for the other, but taking the two things side by side. And so they were found to have much better understanding and knowledge than any of the others who had just focused on the Babylonian education. And ultimately they became prominent in the kingdom of Babylon. He had understanding, and he had wisdom, and he was faithful. He was diligent in applying these things. But the way of the unfaithful is hard, our proverb says. When people do not trust us because we have proven ourselves to be untrustworthy, then nobody does stuff for us. Every prudent man acts with knowledge. When a person makes right choices, prudent choices, makes it on the basis of information that he has. If you have a large amount of money to invest, people don't just blindly say, well, I'll invest in this stock and this in this stock. The prudent man does a lot of research to understand what companies are doing, which way they're going. When a company makes an announcement, they're ready to pounce on that and make a judgment whether to increase their investment or reduce their investment. Foolish people might just follow other people, but the prudent man seeks out information and bases his decision on information. But the fool lays open his folly. The fool does not seek that knowledge and does not apply that knowledge. And so the fool will be caught out. Let's consider the early days of David. He was a shepherd, but while he was sitting watching the sheep, he wasn't just throwing rocks at the trees. He became skillful with his sling, but he was meditating. He was meditating on the sheep and realized that the Lord is my shepherd. He was meditating on the stars and could see the stars are God's handiwork. And so he had a big picture of God, but a very personal one because of his understanding. When he was sent to bring some bread and cheese to his brothers in the battle, he understood that when Goliath stood up and mocked the armies of Israel, Goliath was mocking the God of Israel. He reacted to that reality. He saw that there was a bigger picture than just two nations fighting. He saw that one were God's people and one were opposing God's people, and therefore the challenge had to be answered, and he was willing to answer that challenge. And of course Goliath fell before him. But David was not imprudent. He acted with knowledge. Okay, he was half the size of Goliath. Goliath was strong and well armed. David had no armour. But David had a skill which was coming left field, his skill with the sling. And he knew that with the sling he could get the advantage over Goliath. And so as he went past the brook, he selected 5 stones. He knew Goliath had 4 brothers who were eventually also killed by David's men. He acted with knowledge. He acted with prudence. He had a plan. The scriptures are a key to knowledge and understanding, to knowledge of the big picture of what God is doing in the world, an understanding of how things work in the world. Good understanding gains favour. If you know your stuff, you apply it well, you will be promoted. But the way of the unfaithful is hard. If you don't know your stuff, you get knocked back. Every prudent man acts with knowledge. Before you make a decision, research the matter. But a fool lays open his folly. He follows his heart instead of his head and gets into trouble. trouble.